we go. Australia Lecture 4.
Okay. So also looking at the land and looking what some of the influence would be from foreigners. So you're in Australia, you're crossing the road, you're like, oh no, I don't want a what to cross my path. A what? Kangaroo or a what? Right, or a camel. You know what, the what? So you have these exotics that are introduced. And again, the word exotic technically means introduced. On the test, everyone focus on this. We're like, ooh, exotic, all that cool, weird stuff in Australia and New Zealand. Exotic in this sense means it just comes from somewhere else. So clearly...
Got that. On the test, exotic animal is introduced to an area and it came from somewhere else, like the kangaroo, which came, I believe that came from South America.
A camel is not from here. So camels were brought in as transportation. Why? Why bring in camels to Australia? Yeah, because it's dry. They don't need much water. Exactly. So it's actually a really great transport animal. Because you've got the Australian deserts. Now, what has happened is we don't have a lot of signs that say, careful, that horse is going to cross the road. Don't hit it. Right? So what's happened with a lot of the camels is they have become feral. What does feral?
Point.
Feral mean? And give it a... Yep, perfect. A domesticated animal that has escaped human interaction. Well said. That is basically something that has been domesticated that then kind of goes wild. It's not wild because it was domesticated, but then it goes out. So you can have, feral cats, if you think about that. So you've got all these feral camels that are roaming around, and got to be careful. Not my picture, but so you have camels, rats, mostly from somewhere else, cats, dogs, snakes. There were no snakes before. Pigs, rabbits, and camels. These have all been introduced. These have all been brought into this ecosystem. Now, that's particularly a big deal on an island ecosystem because things were very much imbalanced in a unique way. That changes when you bring these in. So, again, put a star by this for the test. If you're asked if an animal is exotic or native, those other ones we talked about were native, that list is exotic.
And that included dogs, cats, that list that you saw there. Something to remember. Rabbits. In a lot of cases, they didn't have natural predators on the island of Australia.
Hint, hint, hint. Okay. So you've got an example of how things don't work that well. You have a rabbit. You have, again, this competition. The balance starts to go off. Because rabbits do a lot of what? Breed. Yes. You get a lot of rabbit looking. Woo, 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 all the rabbits are all going at it, and then phew, and you got all these rabbits. And you have an ecosystem that doesn't have something in line to keep them in check. So this became a problem. They overpopulated. So one of the things they did was they introduced a predator. I think it was some kind of weasel, which is not a bad idea. However, what potentially happened with the weasel?
Take a guess.
Yeah, then it overpopulates because it's not part of the natural ecosystem. So you try, integrated pest management is an attempt to do that. So then they did something else, and they introduced a disease, myxomatosis. And this was to kill the rabbits, and that actually worked pretty well, even if you feel a little bad for the rabbits. However, when you have a disease, what can happen with a disease? What do diseases do? It's made to kill just the wild rabbits. What can diseases start to do? They can spread and they can evolve. They can mutate, right? So it doesn't just kill those rabbits. So this disease started to kill domestic rabbits and dogs too.
It's important.
So it gets complicated and we have a huge problem with this in Florida. They're dealing with this all the time with introduced exotics. One second, I'm going to just move on with this, actually, but I would love to hear at the break. So, Oh, so not my picture, but I just love it. So you've got these merino sheep. These are also introduced. And this is this is a shearing competition. So shearing, they're just going to take the wool, but still, it's not great. But, you know, you just, I don't know. And they're about to get... But this was an introduction, and this is huge. New Zealand, people talk about sheep. Sheep is a big deal. There's lots of sheep jokes. So I went there, and I was looking for sheep. And I was like, those aren't sheep. And I saw a lot of cows, and I was like, And then I saw a few sheep, a few more sheep, and then there were lots of sheep. So they have lots of sheep. They also have cows that are not as well known from there. But with all of these, what happened is when these were brought, this began a different kind of land invasion into the interior indigenous lands where people were, because they needed more land for all of these to graze. Okay. This is the last little... Just quickly with the environment, nuclear testing, a lot of it was done out in Oceania because they felt like, well, nobody's there, it's out in the boonies. People are there, and out in the boonies doesn't really exist in a globalized world. So one is there was ozone depletion above it, you've probably heard about, but also there's the winds. And radioactive material, like we talked about in Europe, it doesn't care about borders. So you had people in an island, this is my picture of Tahiti, but you had, to show the idea, in a neighboring island in Rengalap, getting super, super sick from the testing. You have kids with chunks of hair falling out and their arms all full of lesions, and it's really horrible. Like, well, we moved them. Yeah, but that's not exactly how that works. So that's been a big problem in this part of the world, and lots of reparations from the developed world that were doing the testing for these other countries.
Now, you're not going to need to know the name of the island or anything, but know that it was in Oceania and know what happened.
Oh. All right, physical. Now moving into the people. Okay, Australia. And these have huge histories that we're going to... So European exploration in Australia. James Cook, he came to Botany Bay. He is from Britain. He took over, a lot more complicated than that. But they made a British penal colony. What's a penal colony? I mean, besides the sort of way it sounds. Other than
this
that,
is important.
What's a penal? Yeah, the prison system. So they made Australia originally. They made all of. Is this still working? Sort of. Okay. And to get sent to Australia, you didn't have to do anything very terrible. You could be just a little petty thief, or we talked about with Europe, if you were an Irish activist, we saw that not-so-cheery film, that could get you sent to Australia, practicing Catholicism, get you sent to Australia. So you've got a lot of people they sent to Australia as these criminals, sort of. But then they had to pardon a lot of them, give them their freedom, because they're out in Australia and somebody had to feed them, and there wasn't a whole industry out there. So they pardoned them so they could farm their own food. Now, you've got these people who are way out there, who are the thieves, and then or Catholics or whatever it is, and then you have the guards who are sent out there. And the guards are seeing this as somewhat of a prison sentence, too. So I saw some play, and there was the pretty little thief, and she's like, ooh, and then you've got the guard who's like, oh. So you end up with a lot of mixing between people who were considered criminals, people who were not. So also when people say, oh, Australia was founded by convicts, that isn't quite technically true. That it was a penal colony, but the people who were sent there were not necessarily what we would consider convicts. So that is the original, how the British treated it. Okay, so also the European exploration in New Zealand.
Point here that British annexed New Zealand, 1849. I don't know if you would need the date or not, but...
The British annexed it in 1849, but this is different. They just took over Australia, but they annexed New Zealand, so it was different because they had a treaty. The Treaty of Waitangi, and this is the one we talked about before where the jade was included in this. That this is the piece of the treaty that is left, and they basically had a pact with the Maori. The Maori are the indigenous people of New Zealand. They actually probably came from somewhere else, but for all intents and purposes, Maori New Zealand. And they said, you can keep your land and your rights, you just have to accept the crown.
Important point. Pretty much like the United States was first settled.
And they were like, well, we get our land and our rights and whatever the crown is. Okay. So they have this treaty that says they get their land and their rights. And that becomes important historically. So, Pacific Islands exploration. This is a picture. I'm up in the airplane going over Palau, and that's Jellyfish Lake. And you can actually see there's some little people in there. Jellyfish Lake, you go in, and it's full of jellyfish. You swim, and you're like, oh, jellyfish are... You're like, ah. But these jellyfish are stingless. That they have incorporated some plant material that is photosynthetic, so they actually get their sugars, they get their energy from that, and they follow the sun as it goes over the lake. And when we first got in there, and the guy said, okay, swim, be careful, don't bonk a jellyfish, don't try and kiss them or anything, and I'm like, okay. But you get in there, and they're so soft, and they're so cute, and they're flu, you kind of want to go, hoo. So I did not, but this really, just jellyfish everywhere. So, in the Pacific Islands, the Europeans came to Palau. The Germans did, and then we did. We had Palau most recently. But other countries, France, the United States, Germany. So also looking at the land and looking at some of the influence.
Sorry.
Just jellyfish everywhere. So, in the Pacific Islands, the Europeans came to Palau.
Know these countries. That
the Germans did, and then we did. We had Palau most recently. But other countries, France, the United States, Germany, the Netherlands are big in this area, and then Australia and New Zealand, which is kind of interesting because after they were colonized, they were like, cool, let's go colonize somebody else. And then Britain, who's also big in the colonizing world. So when we look at some of these things that you still see today, so still tied to France, you have French Polynesia. I mean, it's even called French Polynesia. So it says I'm in Tahiti and Papayete, so that's French Polynesia. And when you look at some of the effects, you went into a little store. You've got your, like an equivalent to a 7-Eleven, and you go to the back of the store, and there's all these. What are these? These are baguettes. This is French. You don't, that's not a traditional Tahitian dish, but that's part of the culture now from globalization. So we go in there, and there's some other little treats. It's a super, super thin pancake, you roll something up in it, what do you call it? A crepe or a crepe, and oh my gosh. And then filled with, Nutella. Who here has had Nutella? Yes. If you did not raise your hand, talk to the person next to you who did and get some. It is awesome. What's Nutella? Chocolate and hazelnut spread. Chocolate with hazelnut all smushed together, and you spread it on bread or a crepe, and then take a spoonful of it. That is...
As you can see here, she is just trying to show you how Oceania and the South Pacific were infused with the European cultures and even traditions in some cases, especially food.
Not Tahitian either. So the fact that I'm getting a Nutella crepe in Tahiti, clearly we've got European influence. And there I am, and I'm very excited. Half my crepe. Tourism is a big deal. That's a lot of the reason a lot of them want to hang on to these places. You get these incredible hotels. I had the Tahitian trip was a 24-hour layover that we did as much as we could to do some research in New Zealand. And I did stay, this is from their catalog, in this hotel, and that the airplane put us up in. And you really do just jump over the edge and swim in the water and think, really? Yeah.
Okay, take a look at the map just to be familiar. It's not real easy to read, but it's starting to list the colonies that different countries have assimilated. In this particular case, the U.S. did Guam and Eastern Samoa, and there'll be more.
Look at current colonization. So France, you've got French Polynesia. United States, we're in the colonization game too. We still have Guam, Eastern Samoa. We wanted these as a political base. And in World War II, to get over to Japan, basically, we wanted these areas. New Zealand still has Nui, the Cook Islands, and the United Kingdom has Pitcairn Islands. Okay. So also looking at the land and looking at what some of the influence would be. I mean, it's even called French Polynesia. So it says I'm in Tahiti. That's not a new trip and then take a spoonful of it. Influence. And there I am, and I'm very excited.
Sorry.
My crap. Tourism is a big deal. That's a lot of the reason a lot of them want to hang on to these places. You get these incredible hotels. I had the Tahitian trip was a 24-hour layover that we did as much as we could to do some research in New Zealand. And I did stay, this is from their catalog, in this hotel, and that the airplane put us up in. And you really do just jump over the edge and swim in the water and think, really? Yeah. So, look at current colonization. So France, you've got French Polynesia. United States, we're in the colonization game too. We still have Guam, Eastern Samoa, and Eastern Samoa. We wanted these as a political base. And in World War II, to get over to Japan, basically, we wanted these areas. New Zealand still has Nui, the Cook Islands, and the United Kingdom has Pitcairn Islands. But this place was heavily colonized. Most of them are now independent. So when you look at some of the things that come from this, so it was World War II, little piece of globalization, something that the soldiers had that became somewhat popular as a kind of food. Comes in a can. It's usually blue with yellow, and it's a kind of meat. Spam. Yes. Who has had spam? Okay, some people have raised their hands. Other people, maybe you have, but you're not raising it in a proud way like you did with Nutella. Okay? Because spam, well, spam is spam. It is just want to say, so it's a canned meat, usually pork. And I've been teaching this class for years, and I kind of knew that spam was something that had been brought in and was popular there. And then when I went, I'm in Yap, and you've got your spam, lots of spam, and then I love this. You know what, your healthy spam? And then I was like, all right, I'm into this. Oh, yeah, sorry. Why? I just liked it that it was there. Why is there so much spam? What's so great about, what's the point? Why spam out on these islands? Why was that adopted and maintained?
Military used it.
If you're on an island and you're not producing all your own food, what is a great thing about something like this? Yeah, it can travel. It's a canned meat. You just put it on the boat. It doesn't matter how many months it takes, and you get this thing that is preserved, and you've developed a taste for it. It's, it's kind of salty and a little processed tasting. You develop a taste for it, and then you can continue to do that. So I was pretty excited about this. We're in Palau, and we're in the grocery market in the main town, and there's a spam aisle. And I was like, oh, and I've got my cell phone. These are all kind of crummy pictures, but I was like, it's kind of hard to see, but you can get, garlic spam. You can get, like up top, the pink one, teriyaki spam. I can see it. I don't know if you guys can see it from where you are. You can get hot and spicy spam. I mean, it's a whole spanorama, So, again, I've learned, they like spam in that part of the world. Whoa! They like spam. And I was asking somebody, what was her favorite food? Because I'm going for the cultural thing. And she's like, spam and lettuce soup. And I was like, oh, that's cultural, right? But this also makes them very dependent. When they don't make spam, but they get spam from other countries, our country, and that makes this relationship that although they are now independent, they are still.
The military actually introduced it to the entire South Pacific during World War II because the military had to feed the troops for long periods of time and they canned meat.
Very connected to the United States, and the relationship is not equal.